safe to say that the trilogy has its moments of gruesomeness and unpleasantness, and those are fine things. Does Best Served Cold? It is Best Served Cold.
It is Best Served Cold.
Does Best Served Cold continue the Abercrombie tradition of unpleasantness?
Yes, I would say it is probably even more unpleasant, if anything. It's, well, it isn't, it isn't. It's still pretty violent. I mean, the formula's similar. My feeling always is you want to try and, you know, do something slightly different, but not totally different. You want to kind of develop, you know, what you're hopefully liked for already. So it has the same, I would hope, combination of kind of black humour and intense violence. Yeah.
Have you ever found yourself toning a scene down, and you write it and you look at it, and before you maybe hand it to your editor, you go, we get away with that?
Well, oddly, when I wrote the trilogy, obviously I didn't have a deal or anything when I wrote the first book, and so it was a big concern for me. You know, is it too violent? Is it very uncommercial? Is it a bit too gritty, edgy for the marketplace? And because I got a lot of anonymous rejections, as people do, you don't really know, and you suspect that may be one factor in it. But unbeknownst to me, I think fantasy has really moved in a much darker and kind of grittier direction, where these things are not at all unusual or even necessarily far out the middle ground. And so, you know, I think it's not beyond the pale, and so I've rarely toned anything down. I mean, I think from the point of view of making an impact, you don't want to become it doesn't want to become bland, it doesn't want to become familiar. You can't overdo the kind of splatter and so on, because I think you lose some impact. So from that point of view, in terms of the balance of it and giving scenes the right impact, I guess, you know, you change the balance sometimes, but not in terms of trying to avoid shocking people, I wouldn't have thought, because the modern audience is pretty hard to shock, I reckon.
Do you think that, in a sense, you were lucky that the market changed in that way as you had your books ready to go, or do you think, sort of in a sense, you've been part of that movement and people are following on?
Well, I mean, I don't think I'm a driving force in the movement, certainly. I mean, I think I'm probably part of a general movement within fantasy, certainly, that kind of perhaps not started with George Martin, but I see George R.R. Martin as quite a significant point in it. It was kind of the first fantasy I read that really had a bit more of a, you know, morally ambivalent, quite dark subtext to it, where you didn't really know what was going to happen, and there was a lot of violence exploding out of nowhere. Much less formal, lyricised approach to violence, if you like. And there seem to be a lot of authors who are doing a similar kind of thing at the moment, and also a few who are combining humour and violence and kind of the dark, and trying to mix the dark and the light together, rather than being either quite sombre or out slapstick. They're trying to kind of combine the two. But I think in general in media and you know, people like Tarantino, I think of them in a way as influences as well, because I think things have got more violent and we have got a lot more used to it. So I think it's almost an inevitable part of a movement in culture, really, towards things, people being more broad-minded about what they'll accept.
Do you personally enjoy the more lyrical or traditional form of fantasy, or do you prefer to be a bit challenged?
Well, I think the two aren't necessarily exclusive. I mean, you could be both lyrical and challenging, I suppose. I think, you know, for a while, fantasy has, at least in the popular consciousness, kind of been very much dominated by Tolkien, and has very much, authors have tended to imitate Tolkien, not across the board by any means. There's lots of interesting work out there, of course, and people who read a lot of fantasy are probably well aware of that. But those who don't read a lot, I think, still do think of fantasy as being very much in that lyrical mould. I think there's nothing wrong with that sort of work, but there is a lot of it out there. So it's not that I wanted to kind of tear up the rule book and do something incredibly new, but I just wanted to apply the things I enjoy and I'm interested in to that style of story, I suppose.